Afternoon. I'm Matthew Spaulding, Associate Vice President and Dean of Educational Programs for Hillsdale College in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the Allan P. Kirby Center for Constitutional Studies and Citizenship. Hillsdale College is an independent institution of higher learning founded in 1844 by men and women grateful to God for the blessings of liberty and believing that the diffusion of education is essential to its perpetuity. And so for 170 years, rejecting any government funding, Hillsdale College has provided education in the liberal arts to students regardless of race, creed, or color. The purpose of this Kirby Center in Washington, D.C. is to extend the college's mission to the nation's capital by teaching students, citizens, and political leaders about the principles and practice of American constitutionalism and how to understand and apply those principles in today's politics. In doing so, we seek to promote not policies or partisanship, but a statesmanship worthy of American liberty. The idea of sound principles and the challenge of their application in the reality of current politics defines today's speaker. I first got to know Paul Ryan when he was with then Senator Sam Brownback, after having been a speechwriter for Vice Presidential nominee Jack Kemp. Soon thereafter, he ran for his home congressional district in Wisconsin, won, and has represented Wisconsin's first congressional district since 1999. A fifth-generation Wisconsin native, he and his wife, Jana, live in Janesville, Wisconsin, with their 3 children, Liza, Charlie, and Sam. Representative Ryan is a leading policy voice in the public debate, especially on budget and fiscal matters. He is now chairman of the House Budget Committee and is a senior member of the House Ways and Means Committee. His first budget plan, the Roadmap for America's Future, remains the centerpiece of Republican budget thinking. Serious in his faith, he is also a prominent and passionate voice for welfare reform and conservative policy solutions. Unsatisfied with the status quo, he believes we have a moral obligation to elevate the condition of men and lift artificial weights from all shoulders, as Lincoln once put it. Because of all these things, it should come as no surprise that in 2012, he was the Republican nominee for vice president. At this rate, he might well make something of himself in the future. But his overriding concern today, and the context in which all these reforms must take place, is constitutional self-government, a topic he will address in his remarks today on renewing the American idea. Please join me in welcoming Representative Paul Ryan.
Thank you. Thanks. Wow. It's fantastic. Thank you. What a beautiful place. I've got to say, Matt and I have been friends for a long time, and I want to thank you, Matt, for your invitation here at Hillsdale at the Kirby Center. I see a lot of young people here. I have been reading the lectures coming from Hillsdale and Imprimis since my early 20s. And I've just got to say how indispensable and how invaluable Hillsdale is to the cause of the American idea. And thank you for doing that. Thank you. You know, you might think it's a little late to give an Independence Day address, but New York, their delegates to the Continental Congress, they didn't adopt the Declaration of Independence until July 15th. So I think I'm fashionably late, or as the New Yorkers say, right on time. Indeed, this topic is always timely. That's because the Declaration of Independence will always be the defining statement of the American idea. And it's the greatest political statement of human liberty ever written. It's a safe-to-say statement. Everyone knows the story of how the American Revolution was difficult and a desperate struggle. We forget in hindsight just how unlikely it was that they would succeed. Many times defeat seemed all but inevitable. Many despaired. Yet that small band of patriot statesmen achieved victory against a long-established and seemingly unlimited ruler of seemingly unlimited power. They did so by remaining dedicated to America's cause and to each other, fighting hard at every turn, knowing that their success or failure might determine whether they or any people would ever fight again for the great purpose of governing themselves. In the past, our nation has survived trials, prospered, and endured, and so has our liberty. I believe we are in a great period of trial again. Yet I'm confident that we can survive, prosper, and endure for many more generations. But all of this depends, as it did in the spring of 1776, or the fall of 1860, or the end of 1941, on what we do and how we act to shape the course of events. On the surface, the problem seems obvious. We have a president who treats the rule of law more like a rule of thumb. But look more closely, and you'll see the problem isn't this president, or at least not only this president. When he leaves office, there will be plenty of other candidates like him ready to take his spot. And all he's done is he has empowered and emboldened a certain governing philosophy, one that is at odds with our founding principles. And this philosophy is gaining ground by the day. The point is, our opponents see politics as a long-term project, and so should we. I want to argue today that in everything we do, in every policy we propose, we need to renew the American idea. Conservatism is not about the past. It's not some misty-eyed nostalgia for a world that has come and gone, and it's not a skittish disposition to merely just go it slow or tinker around the edges. Nor is conservatism about blind opposition to government. For sure, government today is too big, bureaucratic, inefficient, and unaccountable. But we must not jettison the very rule of law that shields our liberty. No, conservatism is about conserving something. Principles that are timeless because they are true, to be renewed and applied in our time. What is the American idea? Well, in short, it is self-government under the rule of law. The American idea is rooted in our respect for the rights with which we are each endowed, a respect that shapes society where every person can work hard, achieve success, and advance in life. Why is this idea so special? Well, for most of human history, a very different idea reigns supreme. The idea that people are fundamentally different. Some are born to rule and others to obey. Almost all were subjects or serfs, shorn of all distinction and firmly stuck in their places. The founders rebelled against this idea. They said everyone is created equal. They have unalienable rights that come from God. And government is legitimate only if it secures these rights. The founders were the first to take these self-evident truths and put them into practice. They were the first to tell the world and prove by their example that the best government rests upon the consent of the governed. It wasn't easy. Their first attempt, the Articles of Confederation, failed. So instead, they wrote a new constitution that both strengthened and limited the federal government. It gave Congress enough power to pass laws for the common good. But it also gave the president and the courts the power to push back when Congress tried to do too much, and vice versa. The very structure of our federal government was a vindication of self-government. 3 branches would control each other, so none of them would control the people. Limiting government and freeing up the associations of civil society would make safety and security, self-government and liberty, comfort and prosperity accessible to everyone. So in addition to our birth certificate, the founders gave us a blueprint for a free society, a set of unchanging principles, as well as a framework of government for a growing nation. But it wasn't just a set of abstract ideas or just a procedural code of law. Our Declaration and our Constitution define nothing less than a way of life for a people. A free people of good character, who would labor for themselves, their families, and communities, grateful to the divine source of their rights and committed to providing the blessings of liberty to their posterity. The framers themselves disagreed about many particulars in the Constitution. No sooner had it gone into effect than they added the Bill of Rights. Each generation struggled with different issues. Could Congress create a bank? Could the president buy Louisiana? Could the federal government build roads and bridges? But there was one thing on which they all agreed. The Constitution was our guide, and the Declaration was our North Star. And the Constitution endured because it allowed prudent statesmen to make wise decisions that preserved self-government under the rule of law. There was one great failure: slavery. But it wasn't a failure of the Constitution. It was a failure of statesmanship. Many of the founders knew that slavery was wrong. But since they couldn't end it there and then, they wrote a constitution that would allow a future generation to do so. Unfortunately, for decades thereafter, frightened politicians in both the North and the South kicked the can down the road. Abraham Lincoln, on the other hand, saw the solution: not to depart from, but to return to the principles of the Declaration and the Constitution. In the struggle of the Civil War, the Declaration defined the high ground, and the Constitution proved powerful enough to reunite a shattered nation. Cleansed with 3 post-war amendments, the Constitution emancipated and offered citizenship to millions. And having endured for over 100 years, the Constitution became a victim of its own success. As our cities grew more crowded and our economy more prosperous and unpredictable, some came to believe that the Constitution was obsolete. And so for the first time, they said we needed a wholesale change. The founding project was over, they argued, and the age of administration had begun. This new age called for a living Constitution, one whose meaning did not rest on fixed principles, but changed according to the winds and the whims of time. In this progressive vision, self-government had to give way to technical expertise, to professional bureaucrats governing according to their centralized plans. The founders believed in the ability of men and women to govern themselves, and they distrusted unchecked power, which is why they limited government and promoted a robust civil society in the first place. Progressives think it's better to govern men, and they seek a much larger and more active central government that reaches further and further into our lives. Unfortunately, through fits and starts over the course of the 20th century, the progressive approach has become a mindset at the heart of the Democratic Party, just as it has clouded Republican thinking as well. This is a core problem that we face today. The American idea has not been rejected, far from it. And the progressive countervision has never commanded a settled majority. Americans embrace some programs first championed by progressives, but they reject others. They accept many aspects of modern government, while still insisting on their rights in constitutional forms. They have never consented to be ruled by experts, and they object to government micromanaging their lives. So this raises basically a question. How do we proceed? Well, we must begin by recognizing practical reality, but always move, sometimes coaxing, sometimes pushing, toward the enduring principles to which we are dedicated. Maneuvering in the sea of politics, we are forced to tack, but always guided by and steering toward our fixed North Star. Self-government under the rule of law is the conservative touchstone. It rests upon human equality and our equal endowment with fundamental rights. It helps us identify measures that conform to the American idea and those that weaken or conflict with the American idea. That's our sure guide for reform. Here's a practical distinction. There's a difference in principle, a very clear, bright line, between 2 kinds of government programs. On the one hand, there are those that can be repaired and restructured within the bounds of limited government. Let's review those. And as we choose, let's reform them, even upgrade them, making them more efficient through market freedoms, more decentralized and transparent, more fiscally sound, and more true to self-government. But there are also many programs of government that are defined by massive bureaucracies intended to direct large segments of our society and our economy. These programs are centrally directed. They consist of arbitrary regulations and directives that increase uncertainty and insecurity and replace popular government by bureaucratic rule. It's a hodgepodge of boards and commissions with uncertain responsibilities and unaccountable decision-making. This way of governing creates relationships between government and money that encourage cronyism and breed political corruption. More and more Americans see this. more and more Americans are right to see these programs as threat to their freedom, their well-being, and their right to self-government. This whole approach is irreconcilable with the American idea, and it must be rejected. The American idea imposes a duty to oppose those programs which subvert popular government and impose administrative rule. These programs and their administrative forms, leading examples being Obamacare and the Dodd-Frank financial apparatus, cannot be reformed or restructured but must be ended, and if we choose, replaced by something completely different and consistent with popular consent and self-government. No reform is possible without recognizing this problem. No reform is worth pursuing that does not turn against this rule and take us down the path toward principled renewal. Now, the progressives were right about something. The country was crying out for a national safety net, especially in light of the Great Depression. The people agreed that we should pool our resources to protect hardworking families. And yes, they wanted smart, talented people to run the federal government, but they didn't want those smart, talented people to run their lives. They wanted to enlist the federal government in the service of self-government. They didn't want to turn over the keys. But progressives didn't pick up on those niceties. Once they got their foot in the door, they stayed and they grew. And they grew. First, there was the New Deal, then the Fair Deal, then the Great Society, and in 2008, they saw what they thought was another great opening. This was their chance to cement their philosophy into place. They say everything they've done in the past 5 years is a logical extension of the safety net. If you liked Medicare, you're going to love Obamacare. But it hasn't quite worked out that way. Instead, the people have been resisting. And the left is baffled. Why support the safety net but not progressivism? Here's the difference. Everybody understands the safety net, and everybody benefits from it. Take Social Security. We all know how it works, or at least how it's supposed to work. When you're working, you pay in. When you're retired, it pays out. Same thing for Medicare. Simple, straightforward. Everybody gets old. Everybody gets sick. And everybody contributes in exchange for a secure retirement. Most people think that's a fair trade, and I agree. That's the opposite of the Affordable Care Act. Nobody understands it. Everybody is anxious. If you listen to the sales pitch, it seems simple enough. Every business with over 50 full-time employees must offer health insurance, period. Or maybe not. Maybe you can get a delay, or a waiver, or an exemption. How do you get one? Nobody knows. The administration makes changes on the fly, and the law changes almost every day. Under the ACA, an autonomous board called the Independent Payment Advisory Board decides what kind of care people on Medicare will have in the future. Bureaucrats are calling the shots, and they are running the show. Take Dodd-Frank. Some say it's like deposit insurance, but deposit insurance protects the little guy. Dodd-Frank, on the other hand, protects the big guys. That is, the biggest, most powerful financial institutions in the country. And the result? The result is predictable. Big banks get bigger and small banks get fewer. More insidious is that this law vastly expands these bureaucrats' power to simply take over the daily operations of any large financial institution they deem to be in trouble. So you can understand the skepticism. In short, the difference between the safety net and progressivism is the difference between fair play and playing favorites. You see, the safety net jives with self-government, and progressive bureaucracy does not. The one gives people more control over their lives, while the other takes it away. And there's a key principle at work here. The reason you have more control is because you earned it. You paid in. You made the difference. That's the very heart of self-government. We, the people, are the masters of our own fate. We can improve our lot by dint of our own efforts and by working together of our own free will. Nobody has to force us or oversee us. Earned success and earned security go hand in hand. Now, don't get me wrong. Everything wasn't all hunky-dory until this president arrived. Social Security and Medicare were going broke. They've been going broke for years. Politicians made promises that they couldn't keep, and now the bill is about to come due. We conservatives must be committed to strengthening these programs, because that's what hardworking taxpayers have earned, and it's what they have made clear in election after election. Limited government with popular consent is the principle that we are trying to uphold here. Every idea I have proposed in this area give people more control over their future. They paid in all of these years so that they would have health insurance. Why not let them choose their health insurance? More choice means more control. More control means more freedom. The argument for conservatism isn't that it's more efficient. It's the heart of self-government. And the problem with progressivism isn't that it's just more expensive. The problem is that it undermines self-government. That's the difference. And that's a key distinction, one that we need to keep in mind. Because there's another fallacy that is popular among our ranks. Just as some think anything government does wrong, others think anything business does is right. But in fact, they're two sides of the same coin. Both big government and big business like to stack the deck in their favor. And though they are sometimes adversaries, they are far too often allies. Bureaucrats prefer to work with the big boys instead of the upstarts that they don't know. They're more predictable and easier to control. So government tips the scales in their favor instead of letting competition sort things out. And big business can become a willing accomplice because regulation keeps the competition out. Many times they don't oppose new regulations. Instead, they help write new regulations. The point is this: crony capitalism isn't a side effect. It's a direct result of big government. And you can see the results at work throughout our economy. It used to be only that the success stories were the household names. Now, the failures are household names. Solyndra, Fisker, Tesla. And businessmen, they don't spend all of their time hustling in the marketplace. They spend more and more of their time hustling in Washington. Both businessmen and bureaucrats take part in this culture of double standards. Take the Internal Revenue Service. It tells every family that they have to keep 7 years of their tax records in case they're audited, yet they cannot keep 6 months' worth of their own emails. It's a disgrace. Neither the founders of America nor of free market economics would recognize in this stratified system a system of truly open market of commerce. It isn't open, it isn't equal in opportunity, and it isn't producing equitable profit growth or hope for those at the bottom of the ladder. It isn't driven by satisfying the needs of people, but by experts, calculus, wealth, and preference. You know, my friend Congressman Jeb Hensling, he's recently launched a great challenge against the crony capitalist economy, in particular against one of its manifestations, the Export-Import Bank. But the bank is just one example of how bureaucratic government is corrupting free enterprise through and through. Conservatives must stop defending this. Cronyism is the progressives' project for economic control. Let them defend it. Finally, there is the temptation to ask the courts to intervene and solve our problems for us. Some conservatives think of judges the way progressives think of bureaucrats. Technical experts with the solutions to our constitutional conflicts. But judges, like bureaucrats, are often the problem. We must be mindful of this temptation. It is true that the Supreme Court can be an ally in conflicts surrounding the Constitution, but it can also be an adversary. Under our Constitution of self-government, the court that really counts is the court of public opinion. We can't simply rely on the Supreme Court alone to defend our rights. We have to remember at the end of the day, the court of public opinion, where the American people hand down their verdict on Election Day, is the final arbiter. In popular government, the people are the final judge and jury. And to come full circle, we must never forget that a people who claim the right of self-government, those people are always on trial. This country began as a people on trial. Out of our first trial in the Revolutionary era, we adopted the greatest, most enduring Constitution ever written. We were tried in Civil War and World Wars, in depressions and inflations, and we survived and we prospered. Every effort to take self-government away from our people has been defeated so far. Will we prevail again? Nothing in history is inevitable. There are no shortcuts or silver bullets. If we are to get through our current problems as we have done in the past. We must do it by our own wits and our own efforts. In this sense, the Constitution is not a living document so much as a life-giving document. It gives purpose and direction to our way of life as a free people. Let us remain committed to the American idea. With the inherent good sense of the American people, we can, we must, and I believe we will, get through these trials together freer and stronger than ever before. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Out of here. Out of here. Next one. All right.
That was great. We have time for some questions for Representative Ryan, and I believe there are some microphones. If you would use those, please. Question back here in the back.
Hello, Congressman. Is this on? Ed Turner with the Fund for American Studies here in Washington. Within the last year, you reached an agreement with your counterpart in the Senate, Senator Patty Murray. How's that working out?
Actually, I think it's working out fairly well. We will have done 8 appropriation bills in the House. The main benefit of that agreement is we brought the power of the purse back to Congress. For 3 years, all we did was punt to the administration, said, you go run the bills. Here's a continuing resolution. Now we're actually going through the actual line items of the budget and funding appropriations, having amendments, having arguments, resuscitating the power of the purse. I think something more, don't quote me on this number, but I think something over half of our members in the House Republican caucus haven't gone through this process before. So by having an agreement which keeps the power of the purse back in Congress and has what we call, appropriations numbers, we're actually going through and exercising the power of the purse. This gives us more leverage to get better things with the Senate in negotiations with respect to riders, with respect to policies within how government agencies function and what their budget levels are. That, to me, was the most important thing that we achieved there. Did it cut spending nearly enough? No. I wanted to add a few zeros to it. But what it did was it got Congress back in the game of doing its job and exercising the power of the purse.
Congressman Ryan, me and many of my peers here, young people, are very concerned about the fact that Social Security will most likely, under current projections, not be there for us when we reach that age. However, far too many of my peers are actually wildly supportive of large government programs. Why do you think that is, and what can be done about it?
They need to go to Hillsdale. 4 Hillsdales, yeah. So at your age, you're at college, I take it? Graduate school. You're probably around 0% rate of return on your FICA taxes. I'm maybe 1% rate of return. My kids are at negative 1% rate of return on our FICA taxes. You would probably do better stuffing your money of your FICA taxes in your mattress for the rest of your life than putting it in Social Security. So the system is on its way to insolvency. When we run out in 2033, you have a 25% across-the-board benefit cut. And that's if Social Security can even keep the rest of it going. And so we need to fix this program. I've always believed that we had to let people keep some of their own money in an account, just like members of Congress have in a thrift savings plan, so that you can earn it, so you can own it, and it's part of your property. That, to me, is something that is far more in keeping with self-government, which is give you the ability to get a better rate of return. And by the way, if you pass away, it's your money. It goes to your family. Make it part of your property, which it right now is not. So I think there are some important reforms to make it solvent so that it's there when you retire so you can count on it, and also make it more part of your own personal property. So to me, that's the kind of act that I think we ought to be doing, which is shoring it up, making sure it can meet its finances, and improve it for the next generations who, the younger you are, the worse you do in the system.
Congressman Carl Gollivan, Article 1, Section 10, no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debt. The founders realized the power of an inflating, depreciating paper unit of credit to steal the wealth of the laboring class. Andrew Jackson, when he ended the Second Bank of the United States, said, We were intended to have a circulating money of gold and silver coin to prevent the wealth of the laboring class from being inflated away by the largest corporations working together with political interests. After World War II, Bretton Woods was imposed or created to bring stability to international relationships. Do we need to restore an honest unit of account, gold and silver coin, to circulation, and a new Bretton Woods agreement between the nations to do away with the petrodollar as just an engine of conflict?
Yeah, so this is a question where what does a prudent statesman do given where we are and where we want to go and where we've been? We need a sound money policy. They're putting fiat back in fiat money these days, I can tell you that. I mean, look at what the Federal Reserve has done. I would go back and rewrite or repeal and rewrite the Humphrey Hawkins law and get the Federal Reserve focused on sound monetary policy, a monetary rule, and having some kind of an anchor so that we have a more reliable, predictable currency. That, to me, is a very important prudential step in the right direction toward getting towards sound money. Going all the way to, say, a gold standard or something like that, I don't think that you could get there right now from where we are. The question is, can we put ourselves back on the road of sound money? And look, there's nothing more insidious a government can do to its people than to debase its currency. And what that is, what I would argue, QE, whatever number we're at now, 3, 4, forever, does that. So I do believe that the federal government, the Federal Reserve, is way beyond the charter it ought to be guising under. I think we should purge all this Phillips curve dogma from the Federal Reserve and from their charter. I think we get the Federal Reserve out of the regulatory business. They're becoming less independent, more political. And yes, audit, but also give them a rule that gives us predictability and transparency so we know what they're doing. That, to me, would be enormous steps in the right direction toward restoring confidence in our currency and restoring sound money.
Hi, Gloria Taylor. I'm actually a political science and economics double major at Furman in Greenville, South Carolina. And we took a class last semester on labor economics, and we discussed labor force participation rate as a means of, registering.
Right.
Connected that to different models of government policies, some which create an incentive to stay out of the labor force. That's and then you have the earned income tax credit that does the exact opposite. So I think my question is, what other policies can conservatives be advocating for that, are means of the government actually promoting getting back into the workforce and becoming independent?
It's a fantastic question. I plan on having a lot more to say about this next week. But I guess I'd take your question and change it a little bit. Is what can the federal government do? What can the federal government do to remove the barriers that are in front of people that make it harder to get into work? Obamacare is a perfect example. Even the Congressional Budget Office gave us this long study that showed millions of people will be induced to stay out of the workforce because of Obamacare. You take that incentive or disincentive effect to work, whether it's subsidies, whether it's the way our welfare system works, or other regulatory and tax barriers, and you gotta remove those so you make it easier for a person to go to work. You know who pays the highest marginal income tax rates these days? It's not Aaron Rodgers. It's not Warren Buffett. It's this single mom with a couple kids who makes $40,000 who's trying to transition from welfare to work. In some cases, she'll pay an 80% marginal tax rate effectively because she'll lose more in benefits than she gains by going to work and getting on the path of upward mobility. So we need to deal with that. And that, to me, that's part of the problem why we have a poverty trap that's trapping people in poverty. And so, like I said, I'll have a lot more to say about this in the very near future. But what we ought to do is systematically go through the government's approach, we're the 50th anniversary of the war on poverty. Poverty rates have basically held the same. Deep poverty is the highest since we've been measuring it. And look at what the federal government is doing that's counterproductive, that's actually backfiring and inducing people to stay out of the workforce. A job is the key bridge to a better life. And so we got to remove those obstacles, smooth those pathways, and then, in my opinion, help revitalize civil society so that the connections between human beings can be more made so that we can help assist and get people on the better path. I think it's a multifaceted effort, but it first starts with getting the government out of the business of doing harm.
Congressman Ryan, the free market is often criticized as based on avarice, greed, and the rest of it. And we recognize that it promotes self-governance and liberty. But can we not also make the case that it's actually based on voluntary trade, cooperation, and charity? Instead of avarice, it's charity, because labor it's a question, I guess, but labor should be satisfying their employers, and companies have to satisfy their customers voluntarily, so that the whole paradigm really should be flipped. What are your thoughts?
I so agree with that. I think somewhere along the line a mistake was made, which compared the free market economy to a competition like a sports competition where one person loses and one person wins. It is not a zero-sum game. It's dynamic. It's organic. People gain mutually. You can grow the pie. And so I think this language that's been used, probably inadvertently, making it about competition, is language that feeds into this stereotype that it's a zero-sum game of winners and losers, and the government needs to be involved to make sure that the pie is sliced up equally. What really, free market economics is really about collaboration, about cooperation, about people engaging in mutual benefit, helping one another, pleasing customers, satisfying the needs of other people, and serving each other. That to me is one of the big mistakes of the paradigm of free market economics. And you can go to Henry Hazlitt and all these great people who have written so many beautiful things about how the free market works. I think we have unfortunately bought into a ditch, bought into a dead end of paradigm, and we have to get back to defending the free market for what it really is and its moral absolutes and its attributes that make it truly the best possible system to organize people. It's the system that has done more to help the poor and help people rise than any other economic system ever designed. We should be proud of it. We should be happy about it. And we should be proud to stand up and champion it. And I think part of it, I totally agree with that, is to change our language so that people understand really what it is and what it is not.
Hello, sir. In this day and age, the word compromise is next to godliness. At what point in time do we take...
Wait, you're saying compromise is next to godliness?
Some people think that. When do we start to take it, instead of being us always giving half of what giving the liberals half of what they want? Next year, we come back, they want the same thing again, we give them half again. When do we turn that on its edge and make them start to compromise and move towards us?
This is basically what I'm trying to say with this speech. What I worry about is that I don't want to make sure that we're just a reactionary movement at sea fighting things or fighting the other side. We have to rededicate ourselves to the core, to the conservative touchstone, to our principles. These great founding principles which are timeless and more relevant and needed today than ever before. And so when we act in government, we have to be mindful of these principles. And we have to act prudently in applying those principles. And what prudence means to me isn't always go slow, take incremental steps. Sometimes you have to do that. But it also means when you have an opening, take big steps. And we have problems coming in this country which will require that kind of prudence as well. So to me, compromise is so long as it's in conformity and advancement of these principles of our North Star, of our guide, is a good thing. If it is just simply splitting the difference with no tether to the principles, then it's just as you describe. He asked me a question about the deal I did with Patty Murray. Until the 11th hour, at the last minute, they were holding out for a big tax increase. We had to walk away and say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to have excessive spending cuts, net spending cuts, and that's the only way we're going to do this. We're not going to do a tax increase. So to me, I had a principle in my mind, which I wasn't going to go with. I wanted to establish a precedent that whenever we have these fiscal problems in divided government, we cut more than we spend, and we'd go and reform entitlement programs, which is the driver of our debt. So we don't just shift money around and do a bunch of the various budget gimmicks that are out there. We do entitlement reforms and entitlement savings, and those exceed anything else we do, and we don't do it by asking more from hardworking taxpayers. That, to me, was the principle I was trying to advance. I made sure that I didn't cross that line. I didn't cross that line, and I was able to get an agreement, not a real big one, But I was able to get an agreement that was in fulfillment of those principles, albeit it was a step in the right direction, it wasn't a leap in the right direction. That's the way I look at these things, which is, number one, we've got to make the case to the country. These are the kinds of elections we have to have in my judgment. I think, you know, the hourglass has been turned and the sands are going, and we've got, I don't know, a half a dozen years before we get solidified into a very dangerous trajectory in this country where we basically become a European-type social democracy with a welfare state, and we stagnate. We lose our liberty, our freedom, our self-government, and we have a big administrative state that does what I discussed in my speech. So what does that mean? That means we have to go to the country and ask the country for permission to reassert these principles and, more importantly, show them what it looks like in practice. We don't like the direction America is going. We think it's bad for everybody. We think it's trapping people in poverty. We think it's creating economic stagnation. We think it's making us weaker as a country, as a people, and we don't want to go that direction. Okay, what do we do then? Here are our principles. This is what we believe in. It's the great, beautiful founding principles that made us special in the first place. And here are the policies that flow from those principles, and here's what they look like at the end of the day. And oh, by the way, if you vote for us and elect us, this is our contract. This is our covenant. This is what we'll do. We need those kinds of elections so that we get the moral authority and the mandate to do that after winning an election, because like I said, we don't have a lot of time left. That's just the way I see it.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Chairman. My name is Bennett Hampelos. I'm a rising senior at NYU, which you can imagine is a very liberal institution. Some of my progressive friends often tell me that President Obama was reelected on a popular mandate, and that includes Obamacare, as opposed to the Romney-Ryan campaign, which essentially ran on premium support, reforming Medicare, and everything that comes with your budget. How do you respond to those people who say that, you know, a popular majority voted for Obama and therefore voted to expand and actually keep the entitlement that is Obamacare?
Yeah. Well, the people gave us the House Republicans in 2010 and right after Obamacare passed to try and say stop. I think we had a status quo election, basically, which froze the playing field where it was and where it is. Again, don't quote me to the math, but I think Mitt and I won the senior vote by like 20 points. And we ran on premium support. Look, my mom and I were doing town hall meetings all around Florida, you know, talking about premium support, how it works. I really believe, here's the other issue. People in the 2012 election heard what Obamacare was going to be from Obama before it actually became effective, before it was implemented. So, yes, it was the rhetoric of Obamacare. It was the theory of big government and all the trappings and all the great rhetoric that was used to sell it. If you like your doctor, you can keep it. It's going to lower your health care premiums by $2,500. It's going to shore up Medicare. It's going to do all these great things. So yes, an election was run on that platform and they prevailed, but they delayed the implementation of the law until 2013. Here comes 2013 and now look where we are. You know, broken promise after broken promise after broken promise. They're turning Medicare into a piggy bank for Obamacare. They're putting this board of 15 bureaucrats in charge of it. Oh, and by the way, if they don't assemble this board this year, which they're supposed to do, one person, Kathleen Sebelius, gets to decide how to run the thing. So talk about progressivism. And so what I think now is the rubber's hitting the road, and the rhetoric looks nothing like the results. And so I think we've got big government in practice now, whereas in 2012 we had it in theory. That was one of the challenges Mitt and I had, when we were sort of shadowboxing against the theory of big government, the rhetoric used to sell it. But now people in 13 and 14 see it in practice, and it looks a whole lot different than the sales pitch. So I think the next two elections are going to be more candid elections, which is what this stuff really is, what it really means, so that people have a very clear sense of it. Our job, our objective, our challenge is not just hate it and oppose it and go against it. It's to say what we would do differently. And what I'm trying to say is we need to be not only an alternative party and a proposition party, but we have to show how we'll govern, what principles we use, what's our disposition, so that the country knows what they're getting. You know, we can't just listen to a bunch of pollsters and a bunch of focus groups to tell people what we think they want to hear. We've got to say, here's what we think we need to do to save the country. These are the principles of how we're going to apply them. Here's what it looks like. And then if we lose that election, we lose that election. But as far as I'm concerned, I think we'll win that election. But as far as I'm concerned, I think it's the only way to fix this. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you, Paul, for those wonderful remarks. And I want you to know you're always welcome here at the Kirby Center, of course, and on the main campus of Hillsdale anytime. And to wear at that occasion, we have a Hillsdale tie for you, a nice blue one like mine.
Familiar.
So you also have good taste. And
you let me pick out the color.
I let him pick out first. Thank you for your remarks, and on behalf of the college, I'd like to thank you for your service to the nation, and especially today, I'd like to thank you for upholding and defending the principles of our beloved country. So thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming.